great group of panelists here. So just a little content warning. The aim of the conversation is to have real and honest dialogue. Our discussion may contain information about grief, trauma, substance use, anxiety, depression. If at any point you're feeling uneasy about the conversation, we are recording it, so you can stop at any time and come back to it at your own pace. If you at any point feel like you need someone to talk to kind of immediately, you can text home to 686868 in Canada at any point, or home to 741-741-741 in the US. And in the chat section, you'll find a link to our resources, which is not9to5.org/resources.
So I just posted that in the chat box. I hope that shows up for everybody. So the webinar chat, I mean, please feel free to send in any, questions that you have, or if you're having any trouble hearing us or anything like that, feel free to type anything in there at any point, and we'll come to it when we can weave it into the conversation. The link should hyperlink for you, but if it doesn't, let me know. And I guess I should introduce myself as well. So I am Hassel Aviles. I am the other co-founder of Not 9 to 5. We're so excited to have this panel here with us. Everybody that I've spoken to about this topic has been so open, and I know how hard that is to do, but I felt like, especially right now in this time, it's super crucial to try to connect as much as possible, even though we can't be physically together. For me, I have had on and off issues with substances before, and I don't really identify with addiction, but I definitely have had people in my life for most of my life that have struggled with that. And so, I wanted to lean on people that I know have a lot to say about this topic. For me, I think in the hospitality industry, it's kind of tough because we're surrounded. We have so much easy access to alcohol and other substances. When I was doing some research and reading and prepare for this, I came across these like Canadian standard thresholds of quantities of alcohol, and for males, it was like no more than 3 a day, or 15 a week. For females, 2 a day, 10 a week. And I had such a hard time with that because as a hospitality worker, I mean, I have exceeded those numbers abundantly, and it's tough. Like this, I think this topic is tough when it comes to hospitality, and I think we're in a niche industry. So, for me, I just wanted to just open up and invite people that I know to talk and to help me talk about this.
Thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Do you want to jump in, Ariel?
As you were saying, Hassel. Yeah, totally. As you were saying, Hassel, I owned a bar and restaurant for a little while, and we always had something new happening, like a new beer, a new wine, a new spirit. And for me, a big part of it was just trying stuff that was kind of like new and exciting. And before you know it, it's just like, drinks kind of add up. I'll never forget going to the doctor, and the doctor asking me like what my consumption rate was. And he gave me like a few different options. He was like, do you have 1 drink a day, or 3 drinks a week, or, whatever it was. And I felt like I had to lie. Like I was so far from the options that he was giving me, that I felt like I was like, there's some real shame associated with kind of like the way I was answering. So naturally I was just, got my back up, and right away I was like, oh, no, like I don't drink that much. But in my mind, I was like, I'm so far from, these allowances. And as Hassel mentioned, I think the crazy part is that, I think in our industry, things don't always make sense. The allowances and the tolerance, the thresholds, it doesn't always make sense. It's like a body mass index, right? It's like, it just doesn't, it's a dated, thought process that doesn't apply to every industry. We actually had a really amazing chat with some brewers, and the brewers were just explaining like it's impossible to even consider that that's a thing, because every day at 3 o'clock people are tasting. Like that's just what it is. And you know, with beer, it's not like you can spit like with wine. With beer, you actually have to drink it so that you can actually have the full effect of the mouthfeel. And so, you know, it's like they're looking at these, you know, these industry standards and seeing, you know, how far off they are. Maybe we can go around and do a quick round of introductions. If you guys want to jump in there.
Who's first?
Daniel, yeah, you want to start, Daniel?
Yeah.
We'll go Daniel, Laura, and
so
then
I'm Daniel. I'm a restaurant manager. Worked my way up the same way as most people in this industry. Started as a busser, server, then bartender, then manager. Struggled with substance use since like grade 7, so probably 12, 13 years old. In and out, up and down, different levels of severity, and as well as depression and anxiety, leading to suicide multiple times throughout my life. And now I am managing a restaurant downtown Toronto, and I've been clean and sober for 4 years, and I personally subscribe to the Narcotics Anonymous program. So I owe my life to that in the last 4 years. Thanks for having me.
thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing that, Daniel. So Laura, do you mind introducing yourself, and then Matt? Oh, I think she's having a sorry, unmute. Sorry, guys. Okay, Laura, sorry about that.
No, hey, no worries. So my name is Laura Green. I am in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. I am a licensed professional counselor. I am not practicing in the conventional sense in terms of seeing clients and, you know, practicing therapy. My work is primarily in research and community education for the hospitality industry. So the population essentially that I work with is hospitality and all of those surrounding like tangential industries. I started, you know, like Daniel, I started as a busser, then became a server, and then a bartender, and then a manager. And then I started working for a distillery, and now I work in distribution. So I have been in the hospitality industry for almost 20 years. That just made my stomach drop. almost almost 20 years. But I had a moment in 2012 that I kind of started looking at my life, and I was like, I don't know if this is a healthy industry for me to thrive in, that I want to do into my 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on. And so I went back to school and got my master's of education in clinical mental health counseling and community counseling, and got my license from there. But by the time I finished my degree and it was like time to start practicing, I realized that all the reasons I wanted to leave the hospitality industry, I now had developed the tools to start addressing that internally. So I decided it was the right move to stay in the industry, which was a hard decision and a scary decision, because I think a lot of people, speaking of substance use, a lot of people stay in the hospitality industry because it allows them to function the way, you know, like it allows them, it almost glamorizes the use of substances in a way that a lot of other industries wouldn't allow. So I had to kind of have a real solid sit down with myself of like, are you staying because you're going to help, or are you staying because this is comfortable and it allows you to operate in that way? I decided that this was the right move for me, and it's been quite a ride the last few years of doing this work. So I conduct research. I founded a company called Healthy Pour, and yeah, and I do a lot of education just like this. I'll share too that when you were talking about the number of drinks that were appropriate, when I was in graduate school in my testing and appraisal course, we took in class an assessment for substances, and it's called the Simple Screening Instrument for Substance Abuse. And it asked questions like, do you have a drink with lunch? And all those, and I scored absolutely off the chart. And my class looked at me like I was, like they were just like appalled at how I scored. I went up to my professor afterwards and I was like, but this isn't work for me because I'm in hospitality and it's different in hospitality. And he was like, okay, if you say so, Laura. It was a big teaching moment. He's like, if you say so. And I'm like, no, but hospitality. And it took me some time to realize that in the hospitality industry, we think that we're superheroes and we think that it doesn't apply to us because it's so culturally normalized. So yeah, that's me. Happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you.
Hey folks, my name's Matthew Ravenscroft. I'm the chef at Rosalinda restaurant. Yeah, I would say I've worked in restaurants pretty much my whole life. Like as long as you can legally work in a place, that's been my first job, like on and off. Just I don't know if it aligns for any reason, but I would say that's also around the time that I started to get involved with substances, started to engage in that sort of behavior pretty frequently. And I think kitchens also like did allow for that, but also I was a young kid, and that habit just kind of like continued as a recreational use. You know, I've been fortunate that I never hit like a very drastic breaking point, and there's a lot of people who have had to deal with that, and that's extremely difficult to confront and can be very challenging. For me personally, I just saw it just wasn't something that I could see as being sustainable, and had seen a lot of other people struggle with this, and a lot of people see their quality of life decline, and there were a lot of other issues that came with it that were kind of eye-opening. And for me, it just became a moment of like looking at myself and looking outwards, and just realizing that this isn't an engagement that I can like keep indulging in constantly and keep creating excuses to keep going with. So I've kind of like struggled with that, and I mean, I've just worked in restaurants for my whole life, so it is a pretty normalized culture. But now, I mean, I think now we're just starting to see that shift, and we're starting to see an openness, and we're starting to see that people who start to put those substances aside, they're actually really thriving and engaging with the potential that they hold. And that kind of became a motivator for me. It's like, imagine what you could achieve if you weren't hungover. And that just opened up this floodgate of possibility for me that I found really enriching.
Yeah, that's super powerful. I mean, I think, you know, finding that inspiration is huge. You know, substances definitely can be a problem when continued use despite social, legal, financial, or mental consequences, and it affects everyone different, right? We're going to talk a little bit about like substance use versus substance use disorder, which refers to the negative pattern of behaviors related to the substance. And I think the point there is the pattern, where it starts to become like a repetitive thing. And then understanding about the fact that it actually can be anywhere from like mild to severe. Like there's different spectrums of where it falls. Laura, how would you describe substance use disorder? Oh.
So I'm actually grabbing my DSM-5 right now, because I can sort of tell you. So substance use disorder substance use disorder is the diagnosis, right? And I first want to highlight that even if you don't diagnostically qualify for substance use disorder, it doesn't mean you aren't experiencing substance use issues. I think something that is shifting within the industry right now is this idea that if you're not addicted, if you're not physically addicted to something, then it's a non-issue. So like a lot of people will do like dry January or cut out alcohol or other substances for a week. And they're like, well, I can quit anytime. It doesn't mean then, that doesn't imply that there's not an issue happening. So there's like substance use disorder, which is the diagnostic criteria, that you fit a certain diagnostic criteria. Then there's substance abuse, and then there's substance misuse. So substance misuse is when it's really just what it says. It's when you are misusing a substance for outside its original intent. So using prescription drugs as an example, instead of using Xanax to calm anxiety, you're using it to feel a certain way so that you can move through the world, and not necessarily addressing anxiety, but experiencing the other effects of Xanax that maybe make life more pleasurable as opposed to manageable. Does that difference kind of make sense? Because like living in a way, if you like using Xanax again as that example, living in a way that you are not totally under a rock of anxiety will make life more pleasurable, but there's a difference when you're taking it to elicit a certain feeling and essentially be high. I mean, it's the opposite of high technically, but to feel that. So then substance abuse turns into that sort of pattern that you mentioned, that you start to experience things like you're not getting things done in the same way. It's starting to impede on your relationships. And then when you move into substance use disorder, let me find, these are all my little tabs so I can quickly find things. Substance related. So when you're looking at substance use disorder, there's all different ones. So you have like alcohol, opioid, all of that. But what you're looking for is, you know, you're spending a lot of time engaging in that activity. It's compromising your ability to have healthy relationships. You're losing friends and family members, or even like it can be qualified as if you have friends and family members coming to you and saying, I'm concerned about your drinking. That goes towards the diagnostic criteria. If you're showing up late to work all the time, if it's kind of plaguing your mind, that you wake up thinking about the substance, if you go to bed thinking about the substance. So that's kind of how that goes. But like I said, you don't need a diagnosis of a substance use disorder to have substance use issues. And when I talk about substance use, I'll generally blanket it under substance use issues to cover the whole spectrum of it. Is that helpful?
That's really
Totally.
helpful. That's really helpful. And I wanted to add, I mean, not to overcomplicate it further, but I also wanted to add that, you know, there's a lot of this terminology and a lot of it may sound redundant or not important, you know, to find a distinction between one to the other. There's also a lot of controversial ideas around what words to use. You know, I've been corrected before to not use substance abuse. I've been corrected before to not use the word addiction. I've been told by people that they prefer the word addiction. So again, if we use certain terms that don't identify with you, please know it's not coming from a malicious place. There's a lot, I really feel like I want to point out that this is a live conversation that is always changing. Every year we're hearing different theories. Two doctors I wanted to point out that have also what you consider controversial ideas are Dr. Gabor Mate, who is out of Vancouver in BC, and Dr. Nicole LaPera, who's in the US, in California. And both of them prescribe to the idea that addiction is actually a coping mechanism to regulate the nervous system. They believe that addiction is a psychological and physiological response to painful life experiences. And I don't know how this resonates with the panel, so feel free to jump in if you would like to, but I know for me, the first time I read that and heard that theory, it really resonated for me, because I know for me, I have definitely used substances to regulate my emotions. So if or a stressful situation, or if I'm having an emotional time, I have used them to numb out. I've used them to not feel. I've used them to not deal, or overused, or whatever. So I did want to throw that in there in case anyone, you know, has some issues with some of these terms that we're using. I just wanted to point out that every year it seems that we're being told different things.
That's true. That's absolutely right. It's you know, as a licensed professional, it's part of my responsibility is to continue my education to keep up with these theories and changes. And I mean, and there's a lot of controversy around substances within my field that's, you know, like harm reduction is one. So in terms of like substance use issues treatment, sobriety works for a lot of people. Sobriety is important to a lot. Sobriety can save lives, but harm reduction is another treatment modality that a lot of folks subscribe to, but then a lot of folks really disagree that it's effective. And so there is some back and forth. And I guess my advice that advice, whatever, is my thinking, I should say, around it is whatever works for you to stay healthy. It doesn't matter what it's called. It doesn't matter like whatever. If it works for you and you're healthy and thriving, that's the important piece. Like that's what matters. And if you have someone coming at you being like harm reduction isn't effective, but you're like living your life in the best way and enjoying it, and you're not harming yourself, no one else around you is being harmed, and you are thriving, who cares? If you're sober and thriving, who cares? That's your business. It's your life, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, Laura, thanks for that. I really appreciate that. I think it's important to hear that. So, okay, in our industry, I want to direct it to the panel now, direct question. You know, in terms of negative impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic, our industry is definitely one of the hardest hit. Plus, we had epidemic rates of substance use, mental health, and addiction before COVID-19. So with all of that in mind, I wanted to ask if you could answer, Daniel, if you could go first, and then Matt, and then Laura. How are you feeling right now in your relationship with substance use? Having said, you know, with all of this, keep all of this in mind of what I just said about our industry. Daniel. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to unmute you. My bad. Okay,
there
Daniel.
We go. It's okay. I'm still getting used to it. I do the narcotics and well, this is actually also answering the question, but with the muting and unmuting, we do the Narcotics Anonymous meetings on Zoom, and it's like 100 people in each meeting, and I feel for the person who's trying to control all the mutes and unmutes, and people will raise their hand. Like there's an actual option in Zoom to raise your hand, and that's how you end up speaking in those meetings. Anyway, I did finally find some Narcotics Anonymous meetings online. There's a really cool group out of, was it Florida? I don't know exactly where they're out of, but anyway, they're super well organized, and they got it down to a T, the mute and unmute and raising of the hand to speak. And it's almost easier than in a room because it's impossible to crosstalk. You can't really like shout at anybody or anything like that because you're muted. But it's also really great because it's really difficult to get into a room, into an NA room, especially in the middle of substance use or substance abuse. It's terrifying. Everything is terrifying, let alone going into a room and, you know, seeing 30 people and possibly bumping into someone you know. You know, the fear of them knowing that you are suffering through substance use is much greater than the positive that will come of knowing that someone you know is going through the same thing. So these Zoom NA meetings, you can even just Google Zoom NA and 1,000 will pop up. They did something like 1,020 different meetings throughout the week. So there's always one for you out there. But yeah, it's crazy. COVID. You know, I'm working takeout and delivery at my restaurant right now, and I'm doing nothing of what I love about the hospitality industry, and that's being hospitable. I'm not talking to anybody. I'm not serving anybody face to face. I don't get to see anybody's reaction when they taste our really good food. I'm not learning anything. I'm not learning about wine. I'm not learning about, I taste and spit wine. I understand, Ariel, you said, you know, tasting, spitting beer is not the same. I can't. I barely ever taste beer because it just froths up in my mouth, and not being able to really take it in as I would if I were to swallow it, but I don't swallow. And so yeah, it's really, I'm struggling the most with falling out of love with the hospitality industry because nothing about it is there for me right now. So with that, I'm working out a lot. I'm doing these NA meetings. I'm ordering. I'm lucky enough that my bosses, the owners of 416 Snackbar, have been paying me throughout this, and now that we're working, we're still getting paid. So I'm using my money to support different restaurants in my neighborhood, and that makes me feel good, knowing that I'm helping out restaurants like ours, just by buying $20 worth of food here and there. And that goes back to NA too. Anytime someone reached out to me or DM'd me to bring them to a meeting, as much as I was helping that person, I was helping myself like tenfold, because there's no greater feeling than to see someone else find help and find some sort of, I don't know, new fulfillment and trying to conquer this disease. Going back to the wording, the terminology, it's really regional. I know this isn't answering this question, but I find it regional just from experience. Like, I went to a meeting in Detroit, I've been to a meeting in New York, and I don't know if this is the U.S. versus Canada, but in Detroit and New York, I found that they were naming their substances of choice. And here in Canada, or at least in Toronto meetings, we say the DOC, drug of choice. We never name it for fear of triggering. So really, I think it's regional. It maybe doesn't happen in all the U.S. Laura, maybe you can answer something like that. Yeah, and whatever is working in your city, in your vicinity, accept it and try to be open to it. And if it works for you, that's amazing. If it doesn't work for you, move on to the next one. So I think that's my best advice for you, just to keep an open mind and try everything. Try working out, try a yoga class, try a Zoom tap dancing class, try anything. There's something out there for you that's going to get your mind off of all this craziness.
Thank you, Daniel. That's hugely helpful. Matt, how are you feeling right now?
Yeah, so I mean, just to kind of like go through like my personal experience with it right now. I mean, I just find I'm someone who's like very goal oriented, even if it's like really small goals. There's just I have like a mindset that focuses on like accomplishing tasks. I think it's just very ingrained from working in a restaurant. That is how things function day to day. So I find I really thrive in a structure. I mean, it's a loose structure right now for sure, and it can be responsive. But I still try to start my day the exact same. I'm doing a lot of meditating, and some days not, and like just trying to be very forgiving that I don't accomplish that. And being in COVID, there's a great part that there's always tomorrow. You get basically the exact same day over and over again, and you can really feel out what's working for you and what's not working for you. And it's okay to be ambitious, and it's also okay to not be. It's such a unique experience to navigate through. And for me, what I really like doing is just focusing on myself and focusing on giving myself the time and the space to kind of navigate through it. So if I find that's kind of where my mind is gone, I actually don't know if other people experience this with substance use, but like I have dreams about it, and that's really unique. But also, like, my dreams are super vivid right now, and they're just like running a mile a minute. So I try to give myself space to walk and reflect, and I'm really trying to be gently challenging with myself, understanding why you have certain behaviors and why you engage in certain responses. A lot of the times isn't because maybe the person you're with or your partner or the person you're living with is trying to be hurtful, but you're taking that in. So I try to give myself a little bit more space with everything, and just like slow down, listen to my body, listen to my mind and what it's craving. A lot of reading. I've really been taking just a lot of pleasure in, like, just like Daniel, I feel like everyone, like, really just trying to help people and like connect with people. I still reach out to my team, even though our restaurant's not open right now. Maybe like once every 2 weeks. I'm sure it's kind of annoying, and like it's a bit of a maternal instinct, I feel like, with people, but just to be like, I'm here. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff going on in people's minds that they're not willing to talk about, but just leaving that door open with them emotionally, it is really the best policy, I think. And just being able to speak to that, because there's going to be some people who are engaging in a really toxic behavior in the workforce, and now they're pulled out of it. They don't have anywhere to be. It creates a really big void where you're able to indulge in that behavior even more. And I imagine that would be incredibly difficult to face that reality. So for me, I try to use that active time that I have, like running or working out or doing whatever I can to just kind of like dig back into myself a little bit while I'm doing it, and also trying to push myself a little bit forward with that. And I think that's been really helpful. Just like, sending little gifts to friends if I can, or dropping something off to them has been really helpful as well. Just trying to focus on like brightening people's day. That's like been my favorite thing so far.
That's amazing. It's so nice to hear too about, I think the similarity is there of like, the fulfillment it brings to actually do something for others. Like, that's super cool. Laura, do you wanna go ahead?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah.
It's a lot of ups and downs. I am incredibly privileged that I live in a space that I love. I really like being in my house, my apartment, so that's good. Like, I was reflecting, I guess a lot of time has been spent in this time reflecting sort of on really what I want my life to be looking like, and confronting, a lot of demons, even as I have a license in therapy and stuff, but it doesn't mean that I'm not a human, and that's something that I try to remind myself, but also my friends and family a lot. It's like, we have our struggles too, and we're navigating. I think a challenge I experienced very early on was that urge to help, and that urge to get out and start saving people, while I was also trying to figure out how to exist in this, so layers and levels of that, while also, I'm very, very privileged to still have my job, so then seeing my peer group and my friends and family members lose their jobs, and I'm at the same time like working my butt off and exhausted. And so then the guilt that comes with that is really, really quite profound, and so it's a constant push and pull of, being grateful, understanding that I am in a very privileged situation, that I still get a paycheck. I live in a healthy and happy home. I have the ability to help people. I have a platform to help people, but also being mindful of what I'm really able to manage, within that. So it's a constant like flip, trying, and then it's exhausting to constantly be examining all angles of my experience and how that relates to other people. I will say that I found that no two people are having the same experience in this. There are challenges on, even I live alone, and I think like, oh man, I wish someone was here. But then I talk with somebody who's maybe struggling with their partner, and I'm like, everyone's struggling. Everyone has a struggle of some kind. And so then I guess, as I talk this out, is the importance of understanding your experience, but also understanding and empathizing with somebody else's experience and connecting genuinely and authentically with the duality in mind. You know, but when it comes to substances, like, I'm not sober, so it's the relationship with, like, alcohol, for example, has certainly shifted. Working in distribution, part of my job is to go out and support restaurants and drink there, and that was already such a struggle. So on one hand, I feel released from that struggle because I'm not obligated to drink for my work, but on the other hand, you know, I still do enjoy drinking, but then I'm doing it alone here, so that changes the relationship, and that's something that I have to also be constantly assessing for my health, because that could spiral very quickly. So yeah,
I love that you're bringing that up, Laura, though, because
sure.
So one thing I wanted to just share and post is a poll. I want to just check in with how everyone is doing. Panelists, this poll will not be for you to answer, but for the attendees listening, it's just checking in on how you guys are feeling at this moment. So I'll share the results at the end. But I love that you're sharing something really important. Ariel, you and I talk about this all the time, that when it comes to substances, I think it's not necessarily about the substance. Oftentimes it's about your relationship with the substance.
Yes.
So a lot of times we tend to like demonize alcohol or demonize cannabis or demonize other substances. And I actually think it's quite important to just stop and ask yourself, like, what is my relationship, or why am I doing this right now? You know, I was reading also that since COVID-19 started in the pandemic, more alcohol sales have increased. And more people are indulging in day drinking and weekday consumption than normal, so than their usual behavior before the pandemic. So I wanted to kind of, you know, put that out there and, you know, hear from you guys in relation to being in hospitality and how vital connection is during any kind of recovery. I know, Daniel, you talked about NA and online meetings. And, you know, Matt, you talked about connecting with your team and checking in on people, which I think is amazing and so helpful. But, you know, how are you guys managing with the isolation right now? I will unmute you. Sorry.
There you go. It's okay. I am continuing to do what I have been doing for the last few years, and that's just constantly kind of like talking to myself and telling myself that this soon will pass. And, you know, I still get bouts of depression. They're definitely a lot shorter than they were years ago, but a little more anxiety than depression, if anything. It's more that like pit in my stomach just comes out of nowhere, and then I start to maybe ever so slightly panic about work and this and that, and I try to get to it before it gets there by just talking to myself and saying this soon will pass. This is temporary. I try to kind of disengage for the moment by you know, they always say don't ignore your problems, but in this case, when I am getting into an episode of anxiety or possible panic, I try to distract myself by putting on a funny movie or maybe listening to some music a little bit louder than normal, which kind of just distracts my brain, like, ooh, a cat or something, you know, it'll distract my brain for that moment so that then I can get back to it with a clear head. When we didn't have this pandemic, I always said the Cineplex movie theaters was my higher power. I don't have any ties to any religious affiliation, so my higher power, and it was the Cineplex movie theaters, because it allowed me to kind of distract my brain and escape everything for that hour and a half to 2 hours. And then when I got out of the movie theater, I was able to attack my issues with a clear head and open mind. Whereas if I didn't have that, and I kind of just like wallowed in my own thoughts that were running loose without any control, then I would just continue spiraling down. So for me, it's definitely that cognitive behavioral therapy, Hassel. I know you like cognitive behavioral therapy, where you kind of talking to yourself from a third person perspective and saying everything's going to be okay. We're in a pandemic. The whole world is dealing with this right now. Or with anxiety and depression, it's like, it's okay. There are thousands and thousands of people dealing with this. This happens. It's going to be okay. And it's easier said than done. But starting that internal conversation is really great, and to do it nonstop. Even sometimes, like, I'll wake up and be completely happy and be like, how am I going to continue being happy today? And even just asking that question without an answer, it kind of helps me continue my day in that mentality. Preparing for that time where I'll get punched in the stomach by some depression or something.
Oh, I love that. I love that question. How am I going to continue to stay happy? Like, when you actually wake up happy, I've totally had that feeling of like, how do I keep this feeling that's happening right now? And that is true. Daniel, you and I did have a conversation how cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and thinking of like not identifying with our feelings. So instead of being like, I'm an anxious person or I'm a depressed person, which is like how I used to talk about myself, now I say I am experiencing anxiety or I am feeling depression, versus trying to bring it into me. It's like something that is like up outside of me. And it's been quite helpful. I agree with you on that for sure. Matt, question for you. I know you don't live alone, but how are you managing with isolation?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think too, like living with someone doesn't necessarily always mean like that you have support. They're also another person navigating through this experience simultaneously. So doing your best to be very supportive and mindful of that aspect, and kind of like stepping back from it and looking at a behavior instead as someone who's like also experiencing this and has a different experience and a different perspective, and all these sort of like intersecting experiences that are causing them to navigate through it a certain way, and just being able to see that has been really valuable. It's really allowed me to kind of like look at how I act. And I personally think it's really hard right now. There's a certain collective like existential dread almost. It's really hard to envision what beyond this looks like professionally, what beyond this looks like personally, in terms of like who's going to be impacted, because I also know people who have been impacted by COVID via like a family member or a friend or whatever, and that's extremely hard to look at. So I think when you're dealing with isolation, and I even today I had a bit of like an anxiety just waking up and like going through it and saying, you know what, I think I'm just gonna like give myself the question of like Daniel says, like it's like, what do I need today, and how can I accomplish that sort of thing. So some days I'm like, I really just want to like read a book for half an hour and fall into that and really enjoy that. And maybe another day I just want to like fold all my laundry in the entire house, and just allowing myself to like listen to what I'm looking for and listen to what I'm craving, and trying to kind of like figure out how I can do that in the house. And some days I don't get it done, and it's just like, who fucking cares? Who cares? It's okay that happens. And like, we're all very human, and we're all experiencing this whole thing simultaneously. And there's a weird solace in that, like we all are connected by this whole thing that we're experiencing. You're not just alone in it. So I mean, just trying. I feel like I've been talking with people who I haven't talked to in a long time too. That's life has kind of paused a little bit for me, which is a plus and a minus. Like mentally, I feel like a lot less stressed professionally, but personally there's a stress there because you have to live the same day every single day. I don't even know how many days into it we are anymore. I used to have a little notepad where I'd write how many, well, if I drink the recommended daily water, I'd put a tick, and by day 30, I'm like, there's so many ticks that there's no point in doing this anymore. It kind of felt like an act of futility. So I think that's really unique. I think it's a really strange time to navigate through, and dealing with isolation is just going to be so different for every person. It's really hard to be prescribing what anyone should do. And I think if it just feels right for you and it feels healthy for you, and it's not detrimental to your well-being or your relationships, like Laura was saying, like, that's okay. And you can do that. And that's really important to consider.
Yeah, I love that you just said that, Matt. I should have said this in the beginning, but I think with any of these webinars, like, please take what works for you and leave behind the rest. This is really just about sharing our own personal individual experiences, and it's not about trying to tell anybody at all what to do. I agree
totally.
with you, Matt, though. We all know for ourselves the best, I think.
Yeah, I think it's allowed me to just try things that I might have been embarrassed to fail at previously. Like, I'm like, I'm going to buy a paint kit and just like go for it. Or I'm going to try building a website.
That's awesome.
I don't know how to do that at all. And that's just been something that's works for me personally.
Well, Matt, I can't wait to see your website then.
It's a long way out.
Laura, what about you?
Much like Matt, so I've experienced depression for most of my teenage into adult life, and excuse me, and what I've found works for me to mitigate that is structure. So if I start finding that I'm waking up late or hitting my snooze, or I am sort of like ignoring the structure in my life, that's when it's like this cyclical thing that happens. I fall deeper into depression, but I'm also like exacerbating that, and it's an indication that things, so something I've tried really hard to do here in this time is to establish some kind of structure. And it doesn't mean like planning my days out to the hour, minute, or whatever, but for example, in my little notebook that I keep of my to-dos, I have a section that I wrote in called Mind, Body, and Grooming. And grooming was not something I really ever paid attention to, but every day I have AM face, AM vitamins, AM teeth. And because like I need to brush my teeth, and I feel a little bit more normal if I brush my teeth. It doesn't mean I'm going to shower that day. It doesn't mean that I'm going to wash my hair. Like it's been a few days, but like, it's something that I can check in with myself and know that I'm taking care of myself. And that's just something that has been working for me. And if I do that, then I've done that for that day, but like Matt said, if things fall by the wayside, or if I woke up planning on doing 2 loads of laundry and mopping my floor and cleaning out my refrigerator and doing all of those productivity things that you read in the articles about, like during quarantine, be productive. But then come 11 a.m., I'm like, I'm done. Then I'm done, then I'm done. And allowing myself the space to do that, allowing myself the space to feel that, to be like, today I'm not going to do that. And also taking the time to reflect with myself of like, it doesn't mean that I failed. It doesn't mean that I failed for that day. It just means that this isn't happening today. Tomorrow's another one. And then the next day is another day. And that's totally fine. So yeah, that's kind of how I'm coping. Also, being able to say no to people when they want to Zoom happy hour with me is like, I know it's a hard thing to say no sometimes, but saying no is sometimes the best, most empowering thing for me, because
boundaries are vital. I mean, they're so important. Boundaries of like, that's not okay with me, or 2 things I wanted to mention. So we got a question written in. I'd like to read it out to you guys. As a GM, I'm in touch quickly I'm in touch weekly with a lot of my team members. I noticed some worrisome behavior around substances with some of my team members. I've already checking in outside the group chats and have been assured that everything is quote unquote fine. How do I start the conversation in another way that neither seems like an attack nor seems intrusive? Does anybody want to comment on that? Daniel, sorry, I will unmute you. There you go.
That's okay. I think it's because I keep muting myself. It's a little bit not easier. It's different for me because I am clean and sober, so I can be direct with my team and kind of be the one who's leading by example. I think other than that, it would be offering resources, offering even just posting about it on social media, not direct to the person or to your team, but having it out there. Or if you have a group chat, that's a great place to post some online like Zoom therapy or like the Zoom meetings, or just different kinds of resources. Making them available to your team is probably the best way for them to pick it up. Because in the end, it's that individual person that needs to pick up that pamphlet and want to make a change. And you know, you can't really beat yourself down if you're not fixing someone else's problem directly. So yes, I understand it would be difficult. Definitely won't seem like an attack if you are trying to help someone directly, but it could, because you're the boss, essentially, you're a GM, you could potentially push that person further into the dark, if they are in the dark right now. So I think just offering resources and like, you know, it's like placing food in front of the person. You don't have to feed the person. Place it in front of them and allow them to eat it themselves. So giving them the resources and showing them the way for them to find it themselves to get to the end goal. If they do have a problem, they may not have a problem.
Yeah, I think
that's super helpful. Sorry,
Mhm.
go ahead, Laura.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's great because it's especially with things like substance use and, you know, talking about, you know, maybe experiencing mental health issues. There's a lot of shame tied up around that. We mentioned that earlier. There's a lot of shame tied up around that. And then people are very likely to get defensive and then internalize that. And, you know, like you said, it gets a little bit darker. Yeah, offering resources is a great way because ultimately the change is going to have to come from that individual who, you know, we can't do that work even as a therapist. We don't do the work for you. You do the work and we facilitate it. So offering those resources and even just saying blanket of like, hey everyone, I'm just checking in. I know this is a hard time. You know, I know that I've been struggling a little bit. Here's some resources in case you need them. Feel free to reach out, or if you want me to help you contact these resources, I can. You know, establishing that feeling and sense of support without doing the work for them so that they can take those steps, because it's even more meaningful that way too.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I just ended the poll and I just wanted to share the results. It's nice to see that the majority of the attendees are pretty good, I guess, considering in terms of how they're feeling at this moment. The second most popular answer was best I felt in a while and happy to be here. So I'm really happy to see that. You know, I know that this is a hard conversation for a lot of people, and I don't know if there's any other questions that people wanted to send in. We have 2 more minutes before we end our webinar. I don't know if there's any final comments as well from the panelists. Now's the time.
No, I think both the points that kind of were brought up about how you can help someone is just putting yourself in a position where like you're here to assist but not dictate. Daniel's so right. Like no one's ever gonna get better unless they want to, and unless they see the value in that. And going any further, you know, it's also, there's another aspect where like maybe that person has a specific outlet that they already speak to. Maybe they deal with therapy, and putting themselves in a vulnerable position could be seen by them as like more detrimental. I do think it's also great to say, you know, like, yeah, I'm having a hard time too. This is really difficult. And just putting those resources out there as like a blanket thing for people. If that person has any sort of inclination and curiosity, they can do it privately. I think like recovery is really difficult because you have to do it almost like privately first, and be able to develop a feeling that it's okay to have this experience and okay to be navigating through this struggle. And then you can, you know, maybe be a little bit more open about it. So the person could just be starting off, and maybe they just don't want to say it yet, but they're happy to have that support, even if they don't, even if they are fine.
Yeah.
I think that's so true. I think also, like for me, the empathy level, like you were saying, goes a long way. And I think if you're concerned about someone, like, I think it's completely okay to express that. Like, hey, I'm a little concerned about you. Like, are you doing okay? And it's like you said, if the answer is no, it's like, well, I'm not doing great either, but you know, what can we do to get you the support that you need? And I think to me, that's, you know, it's about the honesty. And I think that's coming from a place of care, and maybe they're not ready to actually go that distance, but you're showing that you actually care.
Right.
Yeah. And when you reach out like that to be like, hey, I'm concerned about you, you still might get that, I'm fine, you know, but it feels good to be seen too, you know. So they might come back and you might feel like, oh, that didn't go as well as I wanted to, but you gave them something to be like, oh, I'm not doing okay, you know? So just be mindful of that too.
Thank you everybody for joining us. I took a lot away from this, so I can only imagine that everyone did as well. I hope everyone did. But thank you to the panelists, and thank you for everyone that joined us.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. And we'll be in touch. Next webinar is on Monday about reimagining the hospitality industry and talking to some really innovative owner-operators that are trying, well, we're already doing things differently before the pandemic, but are really have new ideas for the future. So appreciate everyone tuning in. So appreciate the panelists, Matt, Daniel, and Laura. Thank you for sharing. And that's it for today.
Thanks
for hosting.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
See you, folks.
Bye.